Alright, I guess we're gonna do this. Let's talk about toxic femininity. Hey everyone, Harris O'Malley from DrNerdLove.com, and this week I want to talk about a subject that gets brought up a lot when we talk about issues surrounding positive male development. One of the subjects that I come back to fairly often is the idea of toxic masculinity. It's something that I personally feel is important to talk about because of how much it directly affects men and how it makes our lives that much harder and that much worse. However, whenever we talk about masculinity in any form, there is such a regular response from people in the comments and on Twitter and elsewhere that you can practically set your watch by it. When are you going to talk about toxic femininity? Now, for the most part, I ignore this because it's usually pretty obvious when folks aren't bringing up a topic in good faith. But occasionally the universe will decide that I don't have enough rage in my life, and, well, that's when I scrap the script for the episode for 1 week and then you get a brand new one that I hadn't been intending. Recently, a coach whose work I respect shared a post by Megan Daum called "Me Too Will Not Survive Unless We Recognize Toxic Femininity." Now, this was shared under the idea of, let's have a discussion about this. Is it real? Is it not? What do we think about this? And then I read the comments that people were making about it, and then, well, we're doing this.
The concept of toxic femininity is, not surprisingly, incredibly popular among conservative and men's rights circles, where it's brought up with great relish whenever someone even hints at the concept of toxic masculinity. Toxic femininity is thrown around like the ultimate gotcha question, the what about that's intended to checkmate SJWs, stymie feminists by revealing the secret flaw in feminist theory, and expose their sinister agenda to the world. Or at least it would be if anybody could agree on what it actually is. As much as toxic femininity gets equated with the excesses of feminism, the subjugation of men, and the dangers of Me Too, the definition of toxic femininity seems to be in the eye of the beholder. The effects and hazards of toxic femininity range from not liking men, to will have dyed hair and piercings, to causing domestic abuse somehow? And then there's that one guy who tried to tie all of this into being literally toxic and comparing women with dyed hair to poison arrow frogs, apparently forgetting that the bright colors and poisonous animals are there to ward off predators. If you ask 5 people to define toxic femininity, you're gonna get about 6 answers. Carrie Manges' piece, "Okay Men, Let's Talk About Toxic Femininity" over at the Good Men Project, is possibly one of the most benign definitions, describing it as an imbalance in feminine energy, leading to guilt, depression, self-harm, and passive-aggressive clinginess. Various YouTubers, on the other hand, define it as forms of deceit and manipulation, ranging from high school queen bee bullying to manipulating and shaming others via the black arts of understanding how social networks work and using this knowledge to their advantage. Others are slightly more varied in their use of the concept, with definitions as wide-ranging as hypergamy and gold diggers looking for an easy payout, to crying to get out of arguments or sway sympathy, lying about men in order to destroy them, or recruiting activists to form their own private army. Look, I never said these arguments actually made sense. Hey, this guy's talking about women faking threats against him. How long do you want to bet until he brings up Anita Sarkeesian? Whoop, there it is. Ed Brodow at the Right-Wing Daily Caller defines toxic femininity as transference neurosis, as in you don't like Trump because you have daddy issues, and also not being happy being a housewife. While in her piece on toxic femininity, Heather Keeing talks about weaponized hotness, insisting that women who display themselves and create hunger in men and then demand that men not be hungry are engaging in toxic behavior. Meanwhile, in Megan Daum's column, which kicked this off, she opts for the manipulation angle with a series of theoretical questions for the women in her readership. Raise your hand if you've ever behaved badly and blamed it on your period. Raise your hand if you've ever acted helpless in the face of an unpleasant, if not physically demanding task, like dealing with a wild animal that's gotten inside the house. Raise your hand if you've ever coerced a man into sex, even though he didn't seem to really want it. Raise your hand if you've ever threatened to harm yourself if a man breaks up with you or doesn't want to see you anymore. Raise your hand if you've been physically abusive with a male partner, knowing you'd be unlikely to face any legal consequences. Raise your hand if you've lied about being on birth control or faked a pregnancy scare to see how a man would respond. Raise your hand if you've ever manipulated a divorce or child custody dispute in your favor by falsely insinuating the man has been abusive towards you or your child. Anyone else wondering what kind of people Megan hangs out with on the regular? The reason why nobody can come up with a uniform or even mostly consistent definition of toxic femininity is because, frankly, it's not a thing. The main reason why the words get tossed around is because nobody actually believes that it exists. It's just an attempt to score points or trigger the libs rather than address an actual societal ill in good faith. The current trend when conservatives and MRAs want to derail the discourse is to try to appropriate the language of social justice movements without actually understanding what they mean. It's an inherent argument in bad faith, trying to change the terms of the discussion by using progressive language and concepts against progressives, as though they were magic spells, and not concepts with actual academic or sociological weight behind them. And this all might mean something if people trying to reverse verbal judo throw the conversation had any actual comprehension about what it is they were trying to say and the script they're trying to flip. Instead, by scribbling out one word and replacing it with an antonym, all that happens is you end up trying to dress up the usual girls are icky, you're all cucks argument with all the rhetorical finesse of replying with I'm rubber, you're glue, and nuh-uh. The problem starts with the frequently deliberate misunderstanding of the concept of toxic masculinity. In order to try to make it seem as though toxic femininity is a thing, people will argue that toxic masculinity is feminist rhetoric gone wild that insists that being male is inherently bad or toxic. This particular argument is especially ironic considering that the term and concept originated not in feminist theory, but in men's advocacy groups. The term toxic masculinity was coined by Shepard Bliss, a prominent figure in the male mythopoetic movement of the 80s and 90s, and it referred to how men's sense of masculinity had been warped and damaged by society, thus becoming hostile and domineering. But far from being the all men are bad condemnation that people will pretend to assume, toxic masculinity refers to behaviors, beliefs, and attitudes about men that are defined as positive, admirable, and naturally masculine, despite being harmful to men individually and to society as a whole. Rather than insisting that men are bad by definition, toxic masculinity refers to beliefs such as men are inherently violent, domineering, and hypersexual, while also being disconnected from their emotions. Anger, contempt, and barely contained lust are considered appropriate emotions for men, while intimacy, affection, empathy, and sensitivity are shameful and to be avoided at all costs. Just as importantly, by the definitions of toxic masculinity, your manhood is something that needs to be defended at all times, because it's not an inherent part of being a man. It's a performance, a temporary status that can be taken from you. This makes for the ironic circumstance where the people who are most in favor of toxic masculine ideals are also the ones who are the most prone to losing their over them. Trump's obsession with his tiny hands, or the YouTube commenters and Twitter users who fling around words like cuck and pussy at the first sign of someone disagreeing with them, are prime examples of the inherent insecurity of toxic masculinity in action. Toxic femininity, on the other hand, isn't a thing because there is no social equivalent. This is in no small part because we live in a male-dominated society, no matter how many times people complain that they just can't hit on women whenever they feel like it. The reason why the behaviors and beliefs in men are considered toxic is because we live in a system that privileges them as not just being definitional, but good, despite the harm that they do. They're things that men are continually exposed to, encouraged to live up to, and find to be reinforced, both implicitly and explicitly. It is a lifestyle and a belief system that is quite literally sold to us. The same can't be said for women because none of the behaviors that that people list as being traits of toxic femininity are seen or condoned as being positive or admirable. In fact, society is pretty damn clear on most of it not being positive at all. The queen bee, with her all-ruling, all-powerful social clique, is almost universally portrayed as a negative. They may be powerful or popular, but they're almost always seen as the villains. Dom's examples of toxic feminine behavior range from the distasteful to the what the actual hell is wrong with you. Moreover, Dom and King both end up using toxic masculine tropes to create supposedly toxic feminine tropes. Both Dom and King's complaints about so-called toxic femininity, preying on men's sexuality, or excusing coercive sex because men always want it, rely on the idea that all men are horny all the time by definition. But a critical part of the definition of toxic masculinity is who's teaching and advocating those values. While men are telling other men that they're supposed to be the big swinging dicks in the room, women aren't teaching each other that these supposedly toxic feminine ideals are the best way to be women. Despite apocryphal stories of covens of evil feminists plotting the downfall of men, women aren't encouraging one another to fake pregnancy scares for the lulz, and they're not dressing up in ways that turn men on just for the joy of denying men's boners. And women aren't encouraging one another to do whatever the random shit Brodow is going about. Look, dude works for the Daily Caller, he doesn't need to put a lot of thought behind any of this. Just as importantly though, these aren't behaviors that women have defined for themselves as being inherently feminine. These are considered feminine behaviors because men have defined them in opposition to masculinity. The behaviors that get described as toxically feminine are seen negatively because it conflicts with male beliefs about which behaviors and attitudes are good and positive for women and which ones aren't. The behaviors that they most disapprove of are ones that are coded either as lesser because they're feminine, or ones that aren't done for the benefit of men. King, for example, condemns women for weaponizing their hotness and then complaining when men act boorish because it's a tease. It's a promise without the payout. The manosphere YouTubers who complain about dyed hair and piercings are complaining that women aren't making themselves sufficiently feminine and attractive for their tastes. The fact that crying is the ultimate trump card and isn't fair in an argument is because men are taught not to be comfortable with displays of emotion. Social manipulation through gossip and rumor is likewise feminine and lesser, a passive-aggressive form of competition that men aren't comfortable with. Even the phrase passive-aggressive is seen as negative and equated with femininity because men are supposed to be straightforward and direct with their aggression. They need to be aggressive-aggressive. Women, on the other hand, aren't permitted to be aggressive. Sure, it's cute, up to a point, but ultimately it's expected to give way to letting a man take the leadership role instead. Hell, even things like supposedly not taking responsibility or finding helplessness are things that women are taught and encouraged to do for the benefit of men because insecure dudes get upset when they're not allowed to be superior. Many guys say that they want to date a gamer girl, but they don't like women who can actually beat them at video games. Or for that matter, they don't like women who can change a tire when they can't, or who otherwise demonstrate that they don't need a man to do things for them. And to be blunt, a lot of the tropes of women being tricksy hobbitses who are out to manipulate or fool men are the creation of a society that promotes and prioritizes forms of femininity that are valued by men. What people are labeling as toxic femininity is often what happens when women try to navigate a system of frequently contradictory rules. For example, society prioritizes specific forms of feminine beauty and sexuality and values them over others, but only if they follow strict guidelines. The most obvious is that women are expected to be sexy without being sexual. She should be virginal and pure, but also able to give a mind-altering blowjob despite having never actually done it before. She shouldn't be fussy about the food she eats, as equally happy to eat a hamburger or a steak as a salad, but also keep her weight and figure within specific limits, preferably without any demonstrable effort. And the meme of, "this is why you need to take a bitch swimming on the first date," only exists because the same people sharing it are demanding that women look a specific way without understanding what it takes to actually look like that. Any guy who insists that he likes his women without makeup almost immediately shows examples of women wearing makeup. And despite people going out of their way to misunderstand the Believe Women hashtag, no one with a shred of intellectual honesty thinks that it means that women don't lie, ever. Women lie just like men do. But, as author Lux Alptraum points out in her book Faking It, what women lie about and why has nothing to do with a culture of victimhood or cunning deceit, and far more to do with trying to navigate a world that's frequently inconsistent with its demands and often actively hostile.
Ultimately, accusations and demands that society in general, and progressives in particular, address toxic femininity as well as toxic masculinity is being asked to participate in an intellectual fallacy. It's a tuo quoque, an appeal to hypocrisy, and it's an argument in bad faith that is intended to dismiss legitimate concerns without actually addressing or examining them. Because even if toxic femininity were a thing, and it's not, it has no bearing on the existence of toxic masculinity or the damage that it does to men. It's a distraction. It's just trying to blame women for the sexism they experience. In the end, Kat Black said it best. There is no equivalent to toxic masculinity for women because toxic masculinity is almost precisely defined by how much men must never be compared to women. If you want to actually eliminate toxic femininity, then the best thing you can do is leave behind the restrictive ideas about masculinity and recognize the value and the validity of the many, many ways of being a real man. Hey, thanks for checking out my latest video. So, obviously, this week I have been playing around a little bit with the format, and I'm going to be trying a few new things in the next couple of weeks, and I would love to hear what you think. If you really dug this week's experiment, the way that we did things, you want to see more, then let me know. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Who knows? Maybe next time, Mr. Senior Kitty will make another appearance. It could happen. And hey, if you have a short dating question or a topic you'd like to hear more about on here, let me know that too. You can share that in the comments as well, or you can send it to me at doc@DrNerdLove and put "for YouTube" in the subject. Meanwhile, if you want to get better at getting numbers and turning those numbers into dates, then check out my newest book, I Got Her Number, Now What? Getting that number is only the start. If you have ever gotten confused or intimidated by texting or calling, you don't know what to say, you don't know how much is too much, are you calling too soon, are you not calling enough, should you be texting instead of calling? If that's you, you need this book. Links to buy it are in the show notes, so go check it out. And if you do check it out, then do me a huge solid and be sure to rate and review it on Amazon and Goodreads. If you're digging the series, then, well, come on, you already know what to do. Hit that thumbs up, share it with your friends, subscribe, ring the bell, you know the whole routine. If you are really enjoying these videos, if you feel like you are getting a lot out of it, if you're finding that it's really helping, and you want to support the channel, then consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/DrNerdLove. For $5 a month, not only are you helping support the channel and help keep the lights on, literally, but you're also getting a lot of awesome bonuses like extra content and access to the patron-only Discord server. And like I always say, I can't do this without the support of my patrons, so whether you've just joined me or you've been a patron from the beginning, thank you so very much. Your support means everything. Meanwhile, you can follow me on Twitter at @DrNerdLove. Join the Facebook page at facebook.com/DrNerdLove. And as always, hit that logo to subscribe, check out my other videos, and I will see you here next time with more about love, sex, and dating. Later.